Welcome back to Beyond Four Walls, Conversations on Affordable Housing. I'm David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference, the nation's oldest and broadest affordable housing coalition. On December 3rd, the National Housing Conference hosted our annual Solutions for Affordable Housing convening at the National Press Club. We were joined by nearly 350 housing leaders from across the country to discuss tangible, impactful, and achievable solutions to the nation's most critical housing challenges. In today's episode, we revisit my fireside chat with Senator Elizabeth Warren, ranking member of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. We discussed the evolving role of the federal government in shaping America's housing landscape and what it will take to tackle the affordability crisis facing communities nationwide. We also touched on the future of consumer protections and the role of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Since our discussion, Congress released the updated National Defense Authorization Act, which was a potential vehicle for bipartisan housing legislation. As of the recording of this podcast, the House was reportedly planning to vote on the updated NDAA on December 10th. The original Senate-passed version included Senators Scott and Warren's bipartisan Road to Housing Act, and the Senate, House, and White House were in negotiations on including a housing package inclusive of some or all of the Road to Housing Act in the updated NDAA. No housing provisions were included, but this conversation remains in play, and my hope is that by the time you hear this, you'll say, oh, that already passed. To view the conversation in its entirety and other sessions from the Solutions for Affordable Housing Conference, visit nhc.org. Well, I have to say, I promise not to be starstruck, but everybody in my family, especially my kids, were very excited we're having this conversation. So I really appreciate you being here. And it's been quite a year, hasn't it?
Yes.
No one is ever bored during a revolution.
No, that's right.
Let's start with some bipartisanship, and then we can get into some of the other stuff.
Sure.
You have been instrumental in getting the Road to Housing through the Senate, and it's pretty impressive. It didn't used to be, but it's a big deal, and you got a unanimous vote. What was that like? How did you do that? So that's kind of magic superpower.
Right. But there's actually another layer to it that I want to make sure everybody in here watches. Think about how housing is done in America. It's not at the federal level. The job of the feds largely has been finance, right? And let's face it, a lot of that is for protection of the banks. It's not really to try to get a lot of housing done, right? That's what a big part of it is. But it's been that. There's been some public housing, but that's been decades since we've made new investments there. And enforcement of civil rights laws, but that's kind of been what's happened at the federal level. All the action has been at the state and local level. And what's happened over that period of time is that the housing shortage in America, that is the number of additional homes that we need for people, has continued, the shortage has continued to grow. So that, you all know the numbers better than I do, but what are the estimates? Maybe about 3 million housing units needed across this country. And what kind of housing do we need? We need housing for first-time home buyers. We need housing for renters. We need housing for seniors. We need housing for people with disabilities. We need housing in urban areas. We need housing in rural areas. We need housing in suburban areas. We need more housing of almost every kind. And we've always seen that as very much a local thing, and that is the right way to look at it. What you need for more housing in Laramie, Wyoming is not the same as what you need in Worcester, Massachusetts. So the federal government has always had this rather constrained role, kind of just these 2 or 3 levers that it pulled. Road to Housing aims at how to build supply. And it says, what can the federal government do to help increase supply? And the answer is not one thing. The answer is literally in this bill, 38 things, with subparts. We can do some here and some there. And let me give you some examples just so you get a taste of what this bill is like. It changes NEPA so that it's easier to get your EPA approval so you can do more infill housing, and so that you can do financing, so you can do it faster. It's got one of my favorite provisions. It advances how to do plan books, pattern books, so that different communities can say, in effect, in advance to builders, if you'll build, this basic structure, and here's where your wiring is, and here's where your plumbing is. However you want to paint it, however you want to decorate it's fine. But if you'll build that basic structure, your approval will be 24 hours instead of a year to be able to get it done. It's another way to advance. It's got a provision in it to say, we're really serious about more housing at the federal level. All of these cities and towns get CDBG money. So what we're going to start doing is we're going to start measuring, did you add more housing? And if you are a housing-constrained community and you're not adding more housing, you're going to lose some of your CDBG money. And what's going to happen is that CDBG money is going to be reallocated to the cities that are building and towns that are building more housing. So it's actually starting to keep track and measure cities and measure them against each other. Who's putting more effort into getting more housing done? It's got an innovation fund that basically says if a locality is working to build more housing, however you want to do it. Maybe you did it through zoning. Maybe you did it by changing how you run your inspection services and went together with 6 other towns so that you get it faster. Whatever it is you're doing, maybe you gave up some public land to make it happen. But if you're working to build more housing, you can tap into the innovation fund and get money for an elementary school, get money for more sewer and, the sexy stuff, sewer and gas lines and water lines, more money to renovate your downtown. You make the decision how to use the money, so long as it's overall supporting the people in your community. But that's what this bill is all about. It has a fundamentally new look at the role of the federal government in dealing with the crisis that is upon us, and that's the crisis of supply. So a lot of pieces for how to get more supply over the next few years to start to build it. Will it be everything we need on supply? Certainly not. But it's a terrific first step and a real shift in beginning to acknowledge nationally how we've got to build more housing in this country. And it passed not only the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee unanimously, it actually passed the entire United States Senate unanimously. So a lot of support behind this.
It's a big deal. And this is muscle memory we've often lost in Congress. And so it is really encouraging. I mean, I did see a quote where you talked about how fun it was working with Senator Kennedy, for instance. Yes. I'm sure it was.
I think the word I used was an adventure.
An adventure. And everybody loves a good adventure.
Yes. But actually, you had asked me how you got something unanimous. This was also one of the best parts, is taking the attitude that more is more. In other words, if you've got a good idea for how to expand housing, that it's not going to work in Boston, but it is going to work somewhere else, and you've got a good idea, and it's not going to work everywhere, but it'll work in some places, the answer is let's put them both in. Not that we can only do one and they have to compete with each other. And so one of the secrets of success in this one is that every single member of the banking committee had something in that bill. And it was good. These were not terrible compromises like where you had to choke and say, okay, we'll go with this. These are all good provisions because they all had the same aim, and that is more access, more housing, more housing. One I left out. Can I mention one?
Absolutely.
Manufactured housing. Mm-hmm. Turns out it's very hard to get financing for manufactured housing because you have to leave the axle in, right? I don't know how much, you really get into the details on this. The federal law now will override and change that. And so it's going to make financing manufactured housing much easier. as one more path to be able to expand. Is manufactured housing the right answer everywhere? Certainly not. But it's the right answer in some places, and it's going to give us more opportunities for more housing. And then just a little side piece, it also has some support in it, a little bit of money in it for manufactured housing communities to be able, I'm going to put this politely, to fend off private equity and engage in self-government and self-control over their land and the communities that they have built. So again, just more opportunity, and trying to bring down the cost per unit of building more housing. So I'm excited about it.
I am too. And there's some amazing stuff that's being done in the manufactured housing space. And the leading edge of that technology, the more innovative it is, it gets harder and harder because the rules are outdated.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson were getting at in abundance. And this bill really seems to embrace that approach in saying this is complicated, and so we actually need to think about how all the pieces fit together.
Right. That's particularly true on the manufactured housing part. It's particularly true, as I mentioned earlier, on the environmental part of this. Getting this stuff moving better, moving faster, because I don't have to tell anybody in this room, time is money, and getting access to financing so that the housing can be built.
Yeah, and that's the piece that I think regulatory staff who haven't worked in this space often miss, which is that delay is, in fact, has an impact directly on the number of units that you have money to build.
Yep.
It's in everyone's interest to move faster and more effectively. So that was the good news.
Yeah, and it is good news.
And it is very good news. Let's talk about CFPB and particularly right now, ECOA, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. There is a new reg that's come out, a notice of proposed rulemaking, that many people say, including me, would gut the Equal Credit Opportunity Act for people of color and underserved groups outside of the really original bill that just addressed women in marital status. What's going on with that? How big a deal is this? And how do we need to be thinking about this? And what do we need to be doing?
So let's start with, it is a big deal. I always look at these and say, how many challenges have there been? The challenges are only a tiny number. You watch the litigation. It's that most places follow the rules because the rules are enforced. So it's not that every single lender is resistant, but they get the right practices in place. And frankly, they get people in this room who come after them when their practices are not delivering in the way that they should. To try to gut that rule is terrible at two levels. One is it takes that tool away so that there will be some lenders that will continue to behave the same way, but there will be many who will not. But it's the other half in the signal it sends, because it says you don't have to try to get this right. We're not going to be there to enforce laws that say everybody gets access to credit. And that fundamentally, we've all understood that housing is the path to middle-class security. Housing is the number one savings device in America for everybody who can buy a home. Number one retirement plan in America, pay off your house and live on your Social Security. Number one intergenerational wealth transfer in America is grandma and grandpa were able to hold on to the house and transfer it to the kids and to the grandkids. Number one way to start a small business in America, own your home and be able to borrow against it as the way you finance the little business that you're trying to get started. Housing is enforced savings. It is something that works and works for everyone. And that's why when you look over a long period of time, going back, we started collecting the data in the 1930s, the racial wealth gap in America so large because of redlining, because of Jim Crow laws, because of shutting principally Black people, but also Latinos out of housing. And so they couldn't build wealth in the same way. And you even see when those laws, 1965, when we change access to credit, we change access to housing, you watch as both wealth for white families and Black families, that's where the data are the best, continues to go up, but the gap starts to close a little for Black families. And then, of course, Ronald Reagan comes in. There's a shift in emphasis, and the gap widens again. This is just going to widen the gap further and take more people out of the opportunity to be able to build real wealth. So, yes, this matters. Here's the other part, because I'm glad you asked the question this way. It hasn't happened yet. It will be rulemaking, and Congress has an opportunity under the CRA to overturn it. So far, the Republicans have not been willing to push back against the administration, but we've got some runway here. We see what's happening. This is a time to be talking to folks. I think of it in the United States Senate, because we will be the ones, we will raise this. We will do a CRA on this to start to plow the ground to say, I want you, particularly important for your red state senators and reps, I want you to vote to overturn that rule. We are not going to turn our backs on our still not strong enough efforts. I don't want to hold this up as what we had was perfect. We could have used more effort in this direction, but to turn our backs and to signal to the entire marketplace we don't care about issues of equal access is wrong. And we just really, this is a moment to hold our elected officials accountable. It's going to be a few months out. Through your organizations, you'll know about it between now and then, but now's the time to start talking about it, because we do have an opportunity to put a stop to it.
And this is a legacy of 50 years. I mean, this is something that the Supreme Court has repeatedly approved of. And how do you possibly comply with something without being measured on what you're doing and how it impacts the people that you're supposed to be protecting?
Well, and of course, the answer is you won't.
That's right.
And that's what
and can't.
And can't. That's exactly right. And that is the signal it sends. It doesn't matter. You do whatever you want at this point.
So this new rule was put out by the CFPB.
Yep.
I'm not sure who actually was doing that. I guess it was done within OMB, because there isn't a lot left of the CFPB. And I say this because this has been a passion project of yours going back before you were even living in Washington. And I remember, because I was working at Treasury during the Obama administration, and Secretary Geithner often complained about your passion for this. Uh-huh. And you were very effective. And
he and Larry Summers.
Yes, well, there you go. We don't have to go there. But we put all of these functions under one roof.
Yep.
Which made a lot of sense at the time. Mm-hmm. And now we've got basically one building that you can blow up, and they've blown it up.
Yeah.
In retrospect, how do we need to be thinking about this? And, the pendulum swings. So whatever happens, the pendulum swings, and at some point, we're going to have to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Right. How are you thinking about that?
So just for a couple of minutes here, remind everyone of the history of this time. Many of you in the room remember the run-up to the 2008 crash. And it was a case of a lot of really scuzzy mortgages out there that initially were being done by non-bank financial institutions. They were running around Fannie and Freddie. Eventually, Fannie and Freddie and the banks get hip deep in it. And then when it turns out that folks can't pay off those mortgages, the whole thing implodes. And depending on the estimates, somewhere around 8 to 10 million people ultimately lost their homes in this, not all through foreclosure, but lost them. And what always struck me, and I kept pounding the table about during this entire period, is we had laws that would have stopped every bit of that. The laws were already there. We didn't need a new law to say you can't cheat people and misrepresent and trick people in these ways. The problem was those laws, enforcement of those laws were scattered among 7 different agencies. And for no agency was it their first task or their second or their third. I still remember going to see Ben Bernanke during the real time of troubles in 2008 and everything is collapsing around us. And Bernanke, remember, who had been chairman of the Fed for years at that point, had no idea that the Fed actually had responsibility for enforcement of certain consumer protection laws. And he actually leaned back and he said, do you mean you think the Fed is supposed to monitor whether people are cheating other people on refrigerator installment contracts? And he does this like, how dirty is this? And I said, yeah, in fact, that's what the law says. You are responsible for that. He was shocked. So the idea from the CFPB was not a bunch of new laws. It was to take the laws that existed, put them with one agency, give them the resources, let them develop the expertise, and then make them responsible for enforcing those laws. And reference to our earlier stuff, modernizing them in some cases. And by golly, it worked. The agency has returned more than $21 billion to people who were cheated. And how many people didn't get cheated because you had a cop on the beat who was pushing the banks, pushing other kinds of lenders, pushing these financial institutions to follow the basic rules. So the good news is, let me do it. Bad news, good news, bad news. Bad news is from the day the CFPB was passed into law, let's just be blunt, the Republicans have hated it. Not every Republican, but a lot of them. It's been kind of the official position. They have voted over in the House to end the CFPB 78 times, something like that, just over and over and over. Never makes it through, but that's what they want to do. And you have to ask yourself why. Why would you hate it so much? And you might say, well, you hate it because you're in league with the financial institutions that want to be able to cheat people. I mean, it fits the facts. Another way to look at it is say, it shows you can make government work for real people. The Consumer Complaint Hotline handled millions of complaints, and people actually got responses and got $35 back or got back their $6,500 down payment when the deal didn't go through, really made this stuff work. But anyway, the challenges kept coming. They kept trying to repeal it through Congress, never made it anywhere. And then there have been the two big challenges through the Supreme Court, and the CFPB survived. Its funding is intact. Its structure is intact. The question is, what does it do now when you've got someone like Russ Vought effectively run? Well, you start with first Elon Musk comes in, with the chainsaw and tries to fire everyone. That goes to litigation. And then Russ Vought comes in and just keeps trying to shut it down. So we've got a CFPB. I would describe it as it's still hanging there in limbo. It's structurally there. Nobody has gotten rid of it. The courts are holding it. Most of the CFPB employees are still being paid. They just can't do their work. And Vought is still trying to find ways. And now he's going into rulemaking, trying to gut the rules that the CFPB has so that there are no laws to enforce, in effect, no rules to enforce. And again, in the larger sense, he runs into the fact the law is still there. He can't do that by himself. So there's lots of litigation that surrounds this. I look at it this way. I cannot tell you how awful I think this is, that someone who represents the American people would decide to take an agency that returns more than $1 billion a year to people who are cheated and just say, I'm going to do my best to lock it up, and to say, go out there and cheat as many people as you want, to the lenders who figure out how to do this. But the agency survives. It's not functional right now in the traditional meaning of that word. They've settled lawsuits. They've given people a free pass. They haven't brought new charges against anyone, even for pretty obvious violations of law. And we're going to pay a price for that. Americans pay a price for that, family by family, and we will pay a price in the economy for that. For those of us who are real nerds in this room, you're watching the default rates tick up. You're watching the pay in four payments skyrocket. We're watching credit card debt load up. People are back again to having to pay overdraft fees, $5 billion a year that you're sucking out of consumers' pockets. That stuff, in an ultimate macroeconomic sense, is not free. These are families, and every dollar that drains out in that direction is a dollar People can't spend on rent, can't spend on groceries, can't spend on health insurance. So we're going to pay a price for this. But the agency is still there. And we have a different administration, an administration that believes in enforcing the law, an administration that believes in a level playing field. The apparatus is all there to turn that thing back on.
Well, and I can tell you that most of my members who are lenders really worry about this because without the regulatory guidance, they don't love every single aspect of the regulations. There are things, I hate this, but for God's sakes, don't change that because I don't want to have to compete against the lowest common denominator of the industry again. And they are looking where they're at now and saying, without regulatory guidance, the law isn't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so my legal risk actually has increased as a result of this. And they're trying to figure out how to deal with it. It's going to end up costing them even more money to internally police themselves.
Yeah, that is such a powerful point you make. That was the whole trick in the run-up to 2008 crash. Was not that one morning everybody woke up and said, I know, let's do these loans for people who already have homes, and we'll give them these really low payments for 2 years, and then we'll throw them into default at the 25th month when they can't manage this anymore. It's that a few people did it and made a lot of money, and then others are caught. They either have to run the same kind of sleazy product so they can have those profits, or they're just offering a lower rate of return.
Yeah.
So you watch the whole industry start to shift. I remember talking to so many of the folks at the community banks and the credit unions who said, we didn't start this, but boy, do we get slammed when our members, our customers are the ones who end up on the wrong end of the stick. So we don't get any of the profits from it, but we sure deal with the fallout and the downside from it. And that's what happens. Regulation, I get it. It's not always perfect. Sometimes it gets a little overreach. Sometimes there's too much red tape. I get all that. But the answer is make that better, not just throw it out, because you throw it out, it gives the cheaters an unfair advantage, and ultimately they drive out the good guys.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. And I remember I had an advisory council when I was at Fannie Mae in 2005, and we had all the major lenders in the room, and one of the economists had done a presentation on the reset risk of the 228 mortgage, which she talked about. It was like a big hockey stick. And I asked, are there any questions? And nobody had a question. Nobody said anything. It was like this discussion did not happen. So we went to a break, and in the hallway outside the meeting, every one of those lenders came up to me and said, it's like lender crack. We know it's killing us, and we can't stop because I'll start bleeding market share, and there's nowhere else to go but down. And that's the essence of systemic risk, isn't it? The system itself is driving people to make bad decisions they know are bad.
Yeah.
And that's where good regulation comes in.
Yep. And that is our job, is get the rules, because ultimately get those rules right, then more people are focusing on how do we finance good projects, get those projects up, get people into that housing, and let them start building some wealth. That's when you're on the virtuous circle.
So let's pivot to the future. We have a few minutes left.
Sure.
Artificial intelligence.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? Well, and, the nature of technology is that we're on this bus, whether we want to be or not. And the question is, who's driving it? And are all the wheels on it? And are we, it's funny because, some of the people like Bill Gates say, we know this is going to end badly, but it's going to be great in between.
Oh, God.
And, okay, so setting that part away outside, we can debate about whether or not the human species is worthy of a logical discussion of whether we should exist. But until we get there, until we get to the last season of Westworld, what should we be thinking? Because, when we talk about regulations, we're talking about a very slow process that's trying to keep up with something that moves lightning fast.
Actually, go back to the design of the CFPB. When Barney Frank and I were in the conversations about building this consumer agency and what should it look like and where should it be. But one of the pieces, this is pre-AI, but anticipating innovation is fast. And for folks in housing, this, new products come on the market, and before you get a chance to read to the bottom of the page, Somebody else is running an ad on it, and some of your customers are bleeding away thinking that's a cool thing to go do. So we live in a space that has a lot of fast movement. And part of the design of CFPB was to respond to exactly that. I described it as not enough enforcement of the law because nobody made it a first priority. Nobody made it a first priority to update for the new things, new kinds of lending, like overdraft fees. Overdraft fees used to be a tiny little bit of a financial institution's revenues. And like I said, now it's $5 billion a year and disproportionately spread among a handful of banks that just really squeeze the money out of people. AI is just the next level, I think, in terms of how fast pieces will move. One of the smartest things that I thought Rohit Chopra was doing when he was running CFPB is he kept meeting with the financial institutions and saying, you can't just say AI did it. If your lending is discriminatory, I don't care if it was Joe or Helen or AI, you're still responsible. It's still your business, and you have to take responsibility for what comes from this. I worry that two things are happening simultaneously. Russ Vought and the Trump administration are sidelining the CFPB, the cop on the beat, at the same moment that AI is in its acceleration phase here. So that we run the risk right now that lending, that compliance with building standards will all start to run through large language models. Mm-hmm. And you just keep getting these answers that spit out, yes, you get a mortgage, yes, you get a mortgage, you don't get one, you don't get one, you don't get one, for reasons nobody understands and nobody feels responsibility to keep check over. So I see the thing that worries me is that without the regulators don't force the human beings who are ultimately deciding where to allocate resources to take enough responsibility for what happens. And I'm worried about what that means. And look, some of these lenders have already begun to figure out they can fire the people who do the face-to-face and look at borrowers, and it's much cheaper to put AI in there, even though it means you, and you don't get any mortgages for reasons either that are bad reasons or reasons that nobody understands.
Well, there's a lot more to understand on that, and we certainly are going to have to do that because we don't have a choice. Yeah. And it is part of the future. It's one of the things that, Lisa Rice and I often talk about is there's this enormous risk of algorithmic redlining, but it also is an incredibly powerful enforcement tool. And the ability to leverage these algorithms and this, especially agentic AI to do enforcement, to inform where the mistakes and problems are occurring is also going to be growing exponentially. And we can be on top of that as well. Yeah.
Plus, it has the potential to help guide people, to be an educational tool if it is done right, to help walk people. It's a complicated process to decide your finances and whether you can afford housing, can you afford to buy a home, what's involved in that. It has the potential to be a more handhold, closer way to walk you through how your questions come. But again, only if we've got some guardrails in place, because in the same way that we watch AI that jumps the rails and urges people into self-harm, you can see the same thing happening in a financial sense here. And if you got no cop on the beat in either direction, then it's like letting loose the whirlwind in our economy and in our lives.
Well, I so appreciate you being with us, and I was really hoping that I would get to spend time with Senator Warren, but also Professor Warren. And I certainly feel like I've been schooled today, and I hope everyone else does too.
No, it's so good to be with all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was great.
That was really good.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Beyond Four Walls. You can visit the National Housing Conference at nhc.org. There you can learn more about affordable housing policies, affordability challenges throughout the nation on our Paycheck to Paycheck database, and explore membership in NHC for you or your organization. We appreciate your interest and look forward to working with you in the future. Until next time, I'm David Dworkin, NHC's President and CEO, wishing you a great day.
This podcast was edited by Resonate Recordings.